Hello and welcome to the Autism, ADHD and Us 3 podcast with me, Jenny Lucas. We'll be talking all things neurodiversity, including late diagnosis, parenting and everything else that comes in between. This podcast is not intended to be diagnostic. I am not a doctor. These are our personal experiences, peppered with research and occasionally the experiences of others. The podcast is intended as a supportive guide through the experience of parenting neurodiverse children as a late diagnosed person, hopefully bringing some relatable stories and laughs along the way. Any relevant links will be in the show notes. Let's get into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Autism, ADHD and Us 3 with me, your host, Jenny Lucas. And this month, I want to deep dive into something incredibly close to my own heart, and that is the unique experience of being an autistic ADHD woman in the same brain, in the same body. It's something I live through, it's something I coach on, and it's something that isn't talked about nearly enough. And if you've ever felt like a paradox and you're caught between two worlds, you're absolutely not alone. I have to say that I have been in autistic community, I have been in ADHD community, and I have never quite felt like I fitted fully into either one. So my purpose and my mission is to try and create community where people who are both can fit and be really comfortable in both. So why this episode matters is that ADHD is still really new, still like a relatively new thing in the world. And many of us are out here navigating what this is like, late diagnosed without some kind of roadmap. And I think it's really validating for us to be able to share these experiences together in a way that's kind of unique to just being autistic or just having ADHD. There's also a huge research gap. You're probably aware of this, but you could only be diagnosed with both ADHD and autism from 2013. Prior to that, they were like separate. You couldn't be diagnosed with both at the same time. And adults could only be formally diagnosed with ADHD in 2008. So that, you know, in scientific and medical terms is moments ago those things became available in the world. And that is, you know, when you see these clickbaity headlines about, you know, the epidemic of ADHD diagnoses, well, yeah, because there's a whole raft of generations of adults that couldn't be diagnosed with it. So no wonder they're all coming forward now that they can. And during this podcast, I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into the sort of contradictions that is being an ADHD person, the struggles and the strengths, hopefully, that certainly define my ADHD experience, and hopefully you'll feel a lot of sort of validation and support through that as well. So the first thing I want to dive straight into is the paradox of being autistic and ADHD, and the paradox of, for me, the crux of it being routine and novelty in terms of how my life works. So I thrive on routine. I love a routine, love having a structure to things, but I also sometimes find it really boring and annoying and irritating. And if I don't have a routine, though, my life is chaos. I don't know what to do. I don't feel like I'm being productive. I really struggle. So everything I would say about my life as an ADHD, and what's made it so difficult to like explain to people close to me, particularly my husband, and to get people to understand, is because it's so contradictory. One day I can be absolutely excellent at organising things, like being a powerhouse of activity, organisation, motivation, like loving life, and then the next day it's like I can't focus, I can't cope with this is too overwhelming, this is too much. I know I made those plans yesterday, but today it's a no. And it's really hard to explain how you can be one person having those two separate experiences all the time. So a good question that I actually heard in a SEED talk that I watched this week by Dr. Tom Nicholson. If you've never heard of Dr. Tom Nicholson, he is this lovely Geordie bloke who is a doctor. He's a PhD. He's got tons of research into being autistic, being ADHD. He used to work for CAMS. Like, he's got lots of relevant life experience and work experience. He did a SEED talk on the experience of being ADHD, which I would absolutely recommend that you go and have a little Google of. It was brilliant, and it was very validating. But he posed the question, do we need sameness and routine
because we struggle to form habits with ADHD, which we do. We literally struggle to form habits in our brains. We're not built for habits. Or is it because we have an autistic preference for sameness and routine, and without it, we start to feel a bit meltdowny and overwhelmed? Or is it both? I think for me, I've got evidence of it being both. I like things being done a particular way because in my experience, I've mapped out that is the most efficient way to do it. And if it is done in another way by another person, I'm normally the one that's left expending extra energy fixing it or dealing with the fallout of the fact that it wasn't done the way that I wanted it done in the first place, and the impact is always on me. So I have, in many aspects of my life, figured out the most efficient way to do things because I know that my energy and my capacity to focus and my tolerance for doing boring shit over and over again is really limited. So I have found the most straightforward way to do things. But also, the form habits thing is a problem. I posted a video a good few weeks ago now on my TikTok about how my morning hadn't gone one of the two ways that I had planned that it could go, because there was a plan B for a particular reason. I don't know why there were, if you're watching, I don't know why balloons just came up on the screen there, no idea. And I ended up going through having not brushed my teeth because the two opportunities where I would have normally brushed my teeth were missed, and therefore I completely forgot that it was a thing that I had to do in my life. So I think for me it's both, but it's an interesting one to ponder on, I think. Executive dysfunction versus autistic rigidity. Is it that we forget things, or is it that change feels wrong? And again, that goes into what we were just talking about there in terms of whether we can habit stack and have habits, or whether we forget those habits because we're not in the routine, or if it feels wrong that I haven't done things a certain way. Some people have a very specific way of getting dressed, for example. I have a very specific way of washing in the shower. So my husband will laugh because I have like the same routine for how I wash in the shower. If I'm having a shower where I wash my hair, I've got a specific routine for that. If I have a shower where I'm not washing my hair, then I have a specific routine for how I wash, because it's not really a ritualistic thing. It's, I know that if I do it that way, I'm not going to have forgotten to wash any of the parts of my body. It's the same when I get dried. When I'm coming out of the shower, I know that I won't have missed any bits, so that when I move and get caught by a bit of cold air for that sensory discomfort, I'm not going to experience that because I know that I've gone through the pattern of what I need to dry when. I'd be really interested to know what things you've got out there that you have that are sort of routine in that way, because I just thought everybody washed the same way in the shower, because otherwise how would you know that you've washed all the right bits? But that is not an everybody thing. I have discovered it's very much a me thing, which I found fascinating. We've got that part of our brains where we seek novelty. So if you are AuDHD, the ADHD obviously is still in plays a part. And sometimes we will set up perfect routines and we'll sabotage them. And for me personally, I find this, if I am trying to follow some sort of like healthy eating, healthy life, weight lossy type thing, routine, I'm able to sort of plan that and set it up, and I need the plan in order to be able to feel like I can follow it. But then there'll be like some days where I will just chuck it all in the bin, and even though the plan is there and I know exactly what it is that I need to do to follow it, my brain's like, fuck this is shit, it's boring, we only live once, let's do XYZ. And that has led to me believing that I struggle with consistency. And to a certain extent, I do struggle with consistency. But because of what my definition of consistency was, my definition of consistency was doing the same thing at the same time every day. Or like, you say you're going to go to the gym for an hour 4 days a week. So therefore, if you don't go to the gym for an hour 4 days a week, you're inconsistent. Well, actually, what I need to do is find an exercise that I enjoy and that I'm going to do, and then find times in my life where it's okay to do that. Like, it doesn't have to always be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, for example, that I do something. And I've put this to the test this year. You might have heard me talking about this on my social media, but I have put this to the test this year in so much as I'm following a creator on YouTube called Grow with Jo. I'm doing all her free videos on YouTube. And I'm also, from the yoga challenge that I did in November, I'm doing some yoga. So I have challenged myself that twice a week I will do a 10 or 15-minute yoga session, usually first thing in the morning. And twice a week, I will do a Grow with Joe video, 15 to 20 minutes, always first thing in the morning, because that's when I can convince myself that it's a good time to do these things. And so from the last week of December up to this point, I'm recording this on the 1st of March. So in March, I have managed to do 2 Grow with Joes or 2 yoga sessions every week since then, with the exception of last week when it was half term here and we redecorated the entire sort of living dining space. So instead of doing 2 Grow with Joe sessions, I was moving heavy furniture and painting walls. So I counted that as my like aerobic exercise for the week, but I still did my 2 yoga sessions. I didn't do them till the Saturday and the Sunday that week because that was when I had the time and the capacity to do them, but I still did them. So I'm creating evidence in my head that I can be consistent in a way that means I'm consistent for me, not in a way that industry or society has deemed is acceptable for consistency. So I'd be interested to know if that is something that you also do, or if that has been a useful thing for you to hear about today. Task switching struggles, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on as well, but sometimes I can flip between activities. So in my day job, I can have 4 or 5 things on the go at once because I am in control of those 4 or 5 things. If 4 or 5 people came to me at different times in the day and said, can you do this, can you do this, can you do this? If I was not in a position mentally to cope with that, then I would really struggle. But because it's on my terms, I can cope with it. And I think that's a theme that is going to fall through the whole of this episode about things being on your own terms. And so balancing that need for routine and that need for novelty can be a bit of a challenge. But one thing that I'm working with particularly this year myself, and I'm working with in clients that I'm working alongside in my coaching, is acceptance. Acceptance is a massive part of the work that I do, regardless of why you come to me for coaching. Self-acceptance is like a primary key aspect to any other stuff that you want to do with your self-acceptance is really key. So learning to accept that you have a brain that both needs routine and novelty is like step 1 of making it work for you. Like, not trying hard not to be frustrated about the fact that I need routine and I also need novelty, and I create routines and then I fucking sabotage them. Like, having acceptance for the fact that that's just a part of who you are is huge. And then thinking about ways that you can put low pressure systems in place, that it doesn't really matter if it gets derailed, but it's still there if you need it. So again, referring back to Dr. Tom, who mentioned in his talk that the way he deals with this is he has quite a rigid like morning routine and evening routine, but he allows the rest of the day in between to be sort of free for ADHD to do whatever ADHD wants to do, to be creative and novel and not have to follow a particular structure or routine. And that was just one suggestion from him about how things could work from that perspective. So the next thing I want to talk about in this episode is friendship struggles. Now, this is something that I didn't really realise that was a struggle for me until after I got my diagnosis and started to sort of deep dive into relationships and friendships and come to the realisation that the way I see friendships is not the way that other people see friendships necessarily, and that from a sort of neurotypical perspective, there is the idea of hierarchical friendships ranging from sort of someone you nod to on the street to acquaintance, friend, close friend, best friend. And it never really occurred to me before that there were friendships that were based on a hierarchical perspective. In my brain, when I meet somebody and we have a pleasant interaction and we get on well, there is no reason that we couldn't then become close friends. And that blew my mind to realise that people don't categorise me in the same way. For the majority of the people that I interact with in life, in person or online, I imagine I am a face that they recognise. I'm an acquaintance. I'm a nice person to leave a comment on a video with. And it's been really eye-opening for me to be aware of the fact that I might think that I've developed a really good relationship with somebody in the online space or somebody in the real world, and actually they don't consider me in the same way. And that has been fascinating and has absolutely blown my mind. And then, of course, when you do that thing where you go back and you look through your life past and you go, all right, okay, And I can see where I've also done that to other people. I'm not saying that every person I meet, I'm like a golden retriever and I'm like, oh, we're best friends now. Like, that's not how it works. I can also see there are people who have felt more for me than I have for them. Absolutely. But my default position is, if we meet and we get on fine and we have great conversation and we have a bit of a laugh, there's no reason why we couldn't then develop that into a better friendship. I don't see that as like a sort of like lesser position to be in than being a really close relationship with someone. Anyway, so as autistic ADHDers, we have a kind of double whammy when it comes to relationships and friendships and making friends. So as autistic people, we can struggle with what's called like positive behaviours in conversations. So the reciprocal nature of a conversation. When someone asks you a question, they are then expecting you to retort with the same question. I nearly said retaliate there, like it's a battle. It's not a battle. But like you're expected to return fire, if you like, when it comes to that conversation. So, you know, that's kind of almost like a social expectation that sometimes we miss. Although I would say as women, generally speaking, and I'm talking a lot in general terms in this podcast, general terms in my own personal experience, I can't talk for all ADHDers out there at all, wouldn't want to, that we learn as part of our mask, and particularly as women who are socialised as women, we learn that it is polite to ask other people those same boring questions that they might ask us about things. It's a pleasant, socially expected, comfortable way for most people, not necessarily us, to carry out a conversation. We also can have intense honesty, unless that's been also kind of squeezed out of you as a people pleaser. But we can come across as quite intense and honest and give people information that they're not expecting or don't want to hear in that moment. And we can also info dump in a conversation. So this is why I like podcasting, especially when I'm doing it by myself. And I like social media because I can talk and there is no one there to interrupt me, and people can choose to listen, they can choose to speed it up, they can choose to fast forward and pass on entirely by, and that is absolutely fine by me. Whereas as an ADHDer, sometimes we can also miss social cues, but we are also interrupters. We are also distracted in conversation, and I find that difficult if I'm having a conversation with somebody and it feels like they're looking at their watch, or it feels like they're like looking behind me or beyond me to see who else is coming or what else is going on. That can feel like a real sense of rejection for me as a person who's trying to have a conversation with you. And as an ADHDer, that's just something that sometimes you just can't help. You can't help but have your focus in 15 million different places. And you can forget, if you're like in a relationship with someone where you're like texting or emailing or whatever, and you forget to reply, that can also be a cause of difficulty within friendships as well. It can be really challenging. And it can also explain why friendships sometimes feel unstable or confusing, and why we often end up in one-sided friendships. Certainly what I was saying earlier on about how I experience friendship, that's kind of how I have found myself in one-sided friendships. I want to have friendships where it's comfortable, where I can spend time with that person in person. We don't necessarily have to be filling that time with doing stuff. We can just be hanging out in the same space together, just like chilling, knowing each other's comfort levels, the comfortable silence, like knowing that you can say things and express yourself and that you'll be heard and accepted, and that you can do the same for the other person, but there's not necessarily this like intense connection all the time. Although in the moments where there is intense connection, that's also acceptable and amazing. I think I'm looking for the unicorn of friendship, where you can just meet someone and like instantly feel okay with them, and know that you're going to have developed this sort of deep care for each other that is reciprocal, but isn't necessarily demonstrated in like typical ways. It's just having someone that will think about you and what your needs are and meet them, and also explain to you what their needs are and expect you to meet them too. I don't know if that makes any sense, but anyway, that's where I'm sitting. I'm looking for that kind of unicorn of friendship, if you will. And again, so in this area of friendship, it's that self-investment, self-acceptance that you will, and I live by this still on a daily basis personally, you will find your tribe, quote unquote. You will find people out there who will get you. And I think this is why I've struggled a little bit since post-diagnosis, and I've been in autistic spaces and ADHD spaces and thought, Christ, I still don't feel like I fit in. I've got these labels and I still don't feel like I fit in. And so that's why I'm creating AuDHD space, because I want to find space not only where I feel like I fit in, but I know there's so many other people out there who are like me and feel that kind of like not accepted in either one of those spaces. So I'm creating a space where we can feel accepted. The other thing that I wanted to talk about today is ADHD medication, and then what happens to be sometimes the sudden autistic awakening from trying ADHD medication. And I know that this is quite a common experience, and it happened for me too, but in a slightly different way. I already knew that I was autistic when I was trying ADHD medication. I'd had the diagnosis of autism. So ADHD was June, autism was August, and then I started trying ADHD medication at the end of the November. So I had the information about being autistic. It wasn't like I had just figured that out sort of through the medication. And also, one of the reasons that led to get my diagnosis was burnout. And once I had the language to explain what it was like to be autistic and ADHD and sort of know what that felt like for me as a person, I then was able to look back and go, all right, when I was in burnout, it was like the ADHD part of me was burnt out, because then it was like all these autistic traits came to the fore. And I really struggled with that. And since I've been coming out of burnout and I'm much better, the ADHD part of me's like come back online. I've got more of that balance now. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else out there. But a similar thing happened then when I tried the ADHD medication. So the reason that so many people have this like autistic awakening, quote unquote, when they try autistic ADHD meds is because the ADHD meds remove the impulsivity and the hyperactivity, or they certainly tone them right down if you're on the right medication, which leaves the autistic struggles to become more visible. You're literally no longer able to mask those autistic struggles because your brain has been lassoed. The impulsive hyperactive part of your brain has been lassoed and put in the pen. It can't get out, and suddenly the autistic part of your brain is like standing in the spotlight going, I did not ask for this. What is, please someone come and save me here. So it's literally more visible. You don't have access to the same impulsivity resources that you did previously. And that hyperactivity has sometimes masked those difficulties with social interaction. So you're not so much thinking about every social interaction as it's happening. What should I say? What should my face look like? What should this? You're not like, you don't so much, before you take the medication, I mean, you're not so much thinking about that and processing it in real time. The kind of impulsive part of you will come out. So if you've ever been a person that has overshared inappropriately or overshared in a conversation, that was more than likely the ADHD part of your brain that was going, I need to fill the silence. I'm going to just say this. I'm going to talk. And then you do the post-conversation dissection for the rest of your life about how awkward that was. That part of you that normally steps in and saves autistics' ass in a conversation is unavailable. And so you become much more aware of how you're presenting, how you're being perceived, what is happening in a conversation, because you don't have that little part of your brain that is able to just jump in and fill the silence. You can also have this sort of autistic lock-in in terms of your ability to hyperfocus becomes even stronger because you're regulating your inattentiveness or your hyperactivity or your inability to focus is kind of being reined in. So you are now more able to hyperfocus and lock in on tasks. And that can become a real problem when you are, in a world where other people exist. If you are in an office space or a space where other people have to interact with you on a daily basis. If you're a parent in a household, that was my experience working from home and being here, where there was people sort of when they'd come in from school and home would want to interact with me. I found that very challenging because I was no longer able to task switch in the same way that I could when my ADHD was raging, if you like. So my tolerance for interruptions personally went way down. I became far more irritable. And for me, the experience of having medication was almost like having this tunnel vision of focus. It was like this, almost describe it as like a cannon. It was like this long thing that I could aim in one direction and I could put like, okay, I've got focus now. Where am I going to put it? Okay, I'm going to put it on that task. And then I had to be on that task, and I could no longer go, oh, this quick thing needs doing. Oh, I'm just going to answer that email. Oh, while I'm here, I'm just going to do that. It was like, no, this is the thing that we're focusing on now. And if you want to focus on that thing, then we are going to have to shift this entire cannon and point it in a different direction. And that is going to be much harder, but you can do one or the other. You may not do both at the same time. And I struggled with that with my ADHD meds. Now I'm going to get to titrate more ADHD meds this month, actually. So I'll be interested now that I've got a lot more awareness. It was a couple of years ago that I last tried ADHD meds, and I know a lot more about how I function now and what my strengths and challenges are. So I'm going to go into it eyes a bit more open this time round, and I'll see if that is still the same experience. And I'll be honest, if it is, I'm probably just going to chuck the meds off, because the cons outweigh the pros for me if that is going to be how it's going to work, because it's almost like I need the ADHD and the autism to balance each other out so that I can be an almost functional person most of the time. But I'll keep posted on that in my socials and in my newsletter. So I think for some of us that have tried ADHD medication and thought, brilliant, this is going to be the thing, and then we've tried it and gone, shit, this is actually making things worse. That can be a real challenging time to navigate, because we're almost sold that, like, if you've got ADHD and you take the meds, for like 90% of people it's going to be fine and it's going to like change your life. And I think for people that are purely ADHD and don't have the sort of other underlying autism to contend with, and bearing in mind there's a correlation of between 50 and 70% of people who've got one have got the other, which is fascinating. And then I suppose it's a wild ride for them, because they do get that nice calm, sort of what you would call the typical experience of being able to focus and be calm and get on with things. They don't have these like autistic traits that are like, hi, we're here now, what do you want to do with us? So I think that can be quite a difficult thing to deal with. When you think, oh, this medication is going to be the thing, and then it's not the thing, and it actually makes other things worse. It can be challenging to sort of cope with. Okay, now what do I do next? I want to also talk a little bit about emotional dysregulation and rejection sensitivity, because they go hand in hand as far as I'm concerned. And when you've got ADHD and autism, it can be amplified, because I know rejection sensitive dysphoria is predominantly seen as like an ADHD thing. But as autistic people, we have also experienced vast amounts of like negative feedback on who we are at our core as human beings, which can cause real emotional dysregulation as well. So I think the two of them do go hand in hand. We have that mix of impulsivity and the autistic deep thinking. You can spend quite a lot of time ruminating over interactions, particularly, and I do separate these out in my brain sometimes, particularly if my autistic impulsivity has caused an issue for me or another person. I can find that almost like the autistic part of me finds that very difficult to deal with and sort of come to acceptance of. And again, self-acceptance is a big key here. It's not necessarily that that's how it's working in other people's brains. For me, that's how I'm able to categorise what's happening in mine. But it can be really, really challenging. And as an autistic person, and I'm not saying that this is not true for ADHDers either, but as an autistic person, I am a very deep thinker and a deep feeler, and I'm very empathetic, or I certainly can be very empathetic, which was one of the reasons why I didn't think I was autistic in the first place, because I had empathy. That was a big myth that got busted for me. I actually feel things much more deeply than my neurotypical counterparts in the world. So I can step into, I imagine, the shoes of another person and feel the weight of that experience, to imagine what it would be like if it was me that was experiencing that in my world. And it can be very difficult to step out of that when you're in it. That's still something that I'm working on. It's something that I'm working on in my coaching with other people as well. But when you have that ability to really empathise, and you have that sort of ADHD emotional volatility almost, it can lead to having big feelings which can last longer. And I've seen that in my own children and their ability to melt down and what they melt down over. It's usually a combination of all of those different things. And then we've got sort of almost like a shutdown meltdown cycle, where some days we fight, some days we freeze, some days we just can't cope, some days we're on top of the world. And a huge part of the work that I'm doing and things that I'm still learning about actually are around the vagus nerve and around nervous system regulation. That is huge in terms of sensory input, in terms of expanding your capacity to deal with challenging situations, understanding yourself, knowing what your needs are, increasing your interoceptive abilities in terms of understanding those signals in your body and what they mean. Like, am I hungry? Am I tired? Do I need the toilet? Like, what's going on? Like, all of that is hugely, hugely tied to nervous system regulation. And I mean, I could do like a day-long podcast talking about all of those things, so I will not go into them in depth now. But if you want to know more about that and you're not already receiving my weekly newsletter, please do go and sign up for it. There's a link in the show notes and in all my social media bios. But that's a huge part of the coaching work that I do in my longer term programs, is looking at what is happening for your nervous system, what triggers it, what state are you in most of the time, what things can we do to help bring more awareness to that, and for you to then start to regulate your nervous system so that you increase that capacity for confidence, calmness, coping. Lovely 3 C's there. But I'll talk more about that on my social media. If you're not already following me and you're interested, please go and find me. And then we live in a world that isn't designed for us. And we know that as autistic people, and we know that as ADHDers, and we know that as AuDHDers. We're told that we have to pick a lane, particularly when you want to go for a support service, which we know hardly any exist in the world at all. You're either the autistic pathway or the ADHD pathway. There is no AuDHD pathway that goes down the middle. And I have certainly found in my experience of doing things that are designed to support ADHD and things that are designed to support autism, that sometimes it's very contradictory for me. And that sometimes some of the things that I will do to support my ADHD is contradictory to what I need for the autism. So it actually irritates autism and vice versa. So finding the support that balances both is crucial and doesn't really exist out there, certainly not in the medical world, which was one of the major reasons for why I'm writing my book this year, and why I have created my coaching services, and why I am being so vocal on the podcast and in social media and raising my profile to talk about being AuDHD and what that experience is and how we can regulate ourselves as AuDHDers, because it is a unique experience to being autistic or ADHD. So that is my bag. That's why I'm here. That's why I have created this podcast. We live in a world that is not designed for us, and we need to find ways to make it work for us as AuDHDers. We are always constantly contradictions, and certainly I've said this before, I've said it about myself, I find myself to be a contradiction. And society tells us that we are a contradiction. We are both not enough and too much at the same time. We are too chaotic and too rigid at the same time. And those messages are reinforced to us, sometimes by the people closest to us, by workplaces, by society at large, by all the Daily Mail readers who like to comment nasty things on people's Facebook videos and the comment sections of all sorts of different places. It's constantly reinforced to us that you're too much of this and not enough of that. And partly what we need to do for ourselves is try and shut out the noise to a certain extent and listen to what's happening inside and believe ourselves about what is happening inside. It is entirely possible to be both too much and not enough at the same time. It is entirely possible to have too much energy and not enough energy, and be overstimulated or understimulated at the same time. That is the nature of being an AuDHDer. And when you start to find acceptance for that personally, those other noises and voices from the outside world start to have less of a hold over you, because you start to find a way to live more authentically for yourself. Learning what we need and having the courage to ask for it, both of ourselves and the people around about us, and possibly workplaces, depending on what environment that you're in, is absolutely crucial to living a life that suits you, that fits you, that you can thrive in. We are not on this planet to barely survive our daily experiences. That sucks. I do not want to live my life like that. I am choosing not to live my life like that anymore. It is a slow, long, ongoing process. you have to be in a position where you're in an environment to feel safe enough to do that. And that starts with feeling safe enough inside yourself before you can then start to feel safe enough to do that externally. That's a whole body of work. That is another reason why I'm writing my book. It is another reason why I have created my coaching services, because I want to support more people to be able to do that, because the more comfortably we can show up in the world, the more of a position we're in to make change for other people that are like us in the world, for other people in generations that are going to come behind us in the world, the better the world will be as a place for everyone to live in, not just us. And we don't have to change. We need to understand what our needs are, and we need to help the world catch up with meeting those needs and helping us to be able to meet those needs for ourselves too. So if any of this has resonated in today's episode, I want you to know that you're not alone and that you're not broken. You're not alone and you're not broken. There is nothing wrong with being an autistic ADHDer. That is a little box of contradictions, because that is who you are as a person. That's how your brain is wired. And it doesn't need to be a thing that you hate yourself for, that you need to work on changing, that you need to hide away from the world. I would advocate that you start to do some work to accept yourself as who you are, and then figure out where some of those limiting beliefs, where some of those negative thoughts in your head are coming from, because they will certainly not all be coming from you. They will be coming from other places. And the more you can learn to be comfortable in your own skin and accept yourself, the less power those voices will have over you and how you choose to live. And it sounds simple to say it. It is as simple as that, but it's not easy work. It is not easy to do that, and it's not easy work. So things that I want you to take away today: self-acceptance is the ultimate goal in life. Everything that I talk about in any format, ultimately the underpinning ideal behind it all is self-acceptance. That and not giving a fuck about what anybody else thinks, but they're one and the same in my mind. We need to figure out a way to lean into our strengths, whilst also figuring out and understanding what our challenges are and having compassion for those challenges. Every human being on the planet has challenges. We've been blessed with more challenges than others. Some of that is because of the way society is set up. Some of that is because of the way that our brains are set up. And I want you to reflect on your own paradoxes as an ADHD. You may have resonated with absolutely everything that I've said in this podcast today. It may have spiraled off some thinking to think, well, actually, I don't struggle with that, but I do struggle with this. Or I don't have that, but I do have this. I'd really love you to share with me what that experience is like for you. So many of you have sent me lovely emails off the back of listening to the podcast. And I can't tell you how brilliant it is when you reach out in person to share your experiences with me, whether they're the same as mine or different to mine or whatever. Like, that's the whole reason I'm here, creating this podcast, creating a Facebook community, creating a membership, creating coaching courses, creating online content, writing a book. Like, it's all there so that people don't feel alone, so that they feel validated, so that they can find some courage and strength to live a life that's authentic to them, so that they can ultimately be happy human beings. Like, who doesn't want to be happy in life, and what does happiness mean, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, if you feel like sharing a comment on this podcast, or even a rating, because the more ratings that we get and the more comments that we get, the more that Spotify and Apple and all the other places will start to push it out to other people. If you're watching on YouTube, I'd love if you could do a little thumbs up or a subscribe or a comment, because again, the algorithm loves the interaction. So, that would be amazing, because then it means that we can get this out to more people, and more people can feel safe and validated and comfortable in who they are in their skin. So final little moments from me. If you're not already signed up to my weekly newsletter, The Positivity Pause, it is lovely. It's nice and lighthearted. It's literally a positivity pause, because it's just a couple of minutes of positivity in the week. Not toxic positivity either. I'm not for that. But it includes, we normally have a theme for the week, and the information is based around that. I always include a positive news story from somewhere in the world, which is designed to sort of remind you that the media constantly pushes negative shit out to keep us small and keep us in fear, but there are happy news stories that exist too. Good things do happen in the world. And then there are some positive psychology coaching bits in there in terms of reframing your negative self-talk or mindful moments, little things that you can do to practice and build into your life, to just take those tiny little baby steps towards self-acceptance, happiness, positivity, living a more comfortable life. So if you're not already getting that, please do sign up for it. The link is in the show notes. I've also mentioned a free Facebook group that I've got that's very tiny at the moment, but I want to grow it more. It's called the Empowered AuDHD Community, and it is literally what it says on the tin. It's a space where I want AuDHD people to be able to come and feel comfortable to ask questions, to share experiences, to unmask, to ask for support, and to get support. So please do come along and join that if you'd like to. And also, I have mentioned a couple of times now that I'm writing a book. If you're interested in finding out more about that book and maybe getting some little exclusive insights into that and being the first to know when it is available to buy, I've actually got a space where you can sign up to join my book waitlist. You're obviously not obliged to buy the book if you're on the waitlist, but it just means that you can get more information from it if you're not necessarily always seeing me on social media or whatever. There's also a link for that in the show notes. And I also have some one-to-one coaching spaces opening up through the next few months, so there'll be links to all of that in the show notes, and it's also all over my website. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much for listening today. If you've got to the end of this podcast, I'm absolutely not offended if you've put me on times 1, times 1.5 or times 2 to speed it up, because I do talk a lot, and I'll be honest with you, I do that with quite a lot of social media videos and podcasts that I listen to, because that is how my ADHD brain enjoys experiencing these things. So thank you very much for joining me, whether you have watched this video or whether you've been listening on the podcast, and I absolutely cannot wait to bring you another episode next month. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.